Hello, now we'll do The Elevator by William Sleator. So, when it says, it was an old building with an elevator, a very small elevator which could carry only three people. Martin, a thin 12-year-old, felt nervous in it from the first day he and his father moved into the apartment. So, Martin and his father move into an apartment. Martin is a 12-year-old boy, and Martin feels nervous from the very first day he gets into the elevator because it could only hold three people. It was a very small elevator. Of course, he was always uncomfortable in elevators, afraid that they would fail, but this one was especially unpleasant. So Martin had a nervous horror of elevators. He always felt uncomfortable in the closed space of an elevator. He was afraid that they would stop midway while going up or coming down. But this one was especially unpleasant. Perhaps this was because of the poor lighting and the dirty walls. So in the elevator there was very little light and the walls were dirty. So he feels it especially unpleasant. Perhaps it was because of the door which never stayed open long enough and slammed shut with a loud clanging noise. So perhaps Martin felt nervous when he gets into the elevator because uh, because the doors always closed quickly. They were never open long enough, and they shut with a loud clanging noise. That is metal vibrating against metal. Perhaps it was the way the elevator shuddered and each time it left the floor as if it was exhausted. So the elevator seems to be making an effort to move from floor to floor. So it might, as if it were exhausted. So it might stop at any time. Maybe it was simply too small. It seemed crowded even with only two people in it. The stairs were no better. Martin tried them one day after school. There were no windows and the lights were not working. So the lights on the stairs, it was dark. The lights were not working, and there were no windows to let in light onto the staircase. Martin's steps echoed behind him on the cement as though there was another person climbing, getting closer. So the echoes that Martin's footsteps make as he's climbing up the staircase, make him think that there's another person who's following him, and that person seemed to be getting closer. This is imagination. By the time he reached his home in the 17th floor, he was gasping for breath. So his home was on the 17th floor, and he was out of breath by the time he climbed the stairs. Martin's father worked at home. He wanted to know why Martin was out of breath. "Why don't you take the elevator?" he asked, frowning at Martin. Frowning means giving Martin an angry look. "You're not only skinny and weak and bad at sports," his face seemed to say, "but you're also a coward." So Martin's father's expression seemed to be angry because Martin was very skinny or thin and he was bad at sports and he was weak. After that, Martin always took the elevator. After he got this scolding from his father, he always took the elevator. He would have to get used to it, he told himself, just like he got used to being bullied at school. So he would have to get used to the unpleasantness of riding up and down in the elevator. And just as he had got used to being bullied at school, the older boys, stronger boys, used to pick on Martin and they used to push Martin about. So just as he was used to that, he had to get used to the elevator. He told himself. But he didn't get used to it. He was always afraid that it would stop suddenly and he would be trapped inside for hours by himself. So whenever he took the elevator, there was always a thought in the corner of his mind that the elevator would stop somewhere, and he would be stuck in it for hours. But it wasn't much better when there were other passengers. He didn't like to be close to them. He also disliked the way people tried hard not to look at one another, staring at nothing. So when there were two or three people in the elevator, they all tried to keep to themselves without even talking, and they tried hard not to look at one another, and they stared at nothing. One morning, the elevator stopped at the 14th floor, and a fat lady got on. She was wearing an old green coat that ballooned around her. So the fat lady got on to the elevator at the 13th floor, and she was wearing a green coat that was like a balloon around her. As she waddled into the elevator, Martin was sure he felt it sink under her weight. So she waddled. Waddled is the way a fat person walks, like a duck. Like a duck waddles. The fat lady waddled into the elevator, and Martin was sure that because she was so heavy, the elevator went down an inch or two. It sank under her weight. She was so big that her coat brushed against him, and he had to squeeze himself into a corner. So he covered up almost 7/8 of the elevator, and he had to squeeze himself into a corner. Uh, there was no room for anybody else. The door closed quickly behind her, and instead of facing it, she turned around and stared at Martin. So the fat lady turns around and gives Martin a long, angry look. He looked at her for a moment. She was large. She had large, fleshy cheeks and no chin, just a huge mass of neck. So she had a double chin or a triple chin, and she had no neck. There was just large, round cheeks and just a huge mass of neck. Her blue eyes were tiny but sharp. They seemed to be boring into Martin's face. So the woman gives Martin a very inquiring look, and they seemed to be boring into Martin as a drill would bore into a piece of wood or a piece of metal. Martin looked away, but the woman didn't turn around. Was she still looking at him? He glanced at her quickly, then looked away again. She was still watching him. He wanted to close his eyes. He wanted to turn around and stare into the corner, but how could he? So he was facing her. He wanted to turn around and stare into the corner, looking at the two sides of the elevator, but he couldn't. The elevator creaked down to 12, then 11. The piggy eyes were still looking at him. So the fat woman is really looking at Martin for a very long time. She had piggy eyes. Piggy eyes means they were small, like pig has. She had to be crazy. Why else would she stare at him like this? What was she going to do next? She did nothing. She only watched him breathing loudly, so her breath could be heard, and it was audible until the elevator reached the first floor at last. Martin wanted to run past her to get out, but there was no room. He could only wait as she turned and moved slowly out into the lobby. Then he ran. He didn't care what she thought. He ran nearly all the way to school. He thought about her all day. Did she live in the building? He had never seen her before, and the building was not very big. Maybe she was visiting somebody. But 7:30 in the morning was too early for visiting. So he had got onto the elevator at 7:30, so she was not a visitor to the building because 7:30 is too early for visiting. Martin felt nervous when he got back to the building after school. But why should he be afraid of an old lady? He felt ashamed of himself. He pressed the button and stepped into the elevator, hoping that it would not stop. But it stopped on the third floor. Martin watched the door slide open, revealing a green coat, a piggish face, and blue eyes which were already staring at him as if she knew he would be there. It wasn't possible. It was like a nightmare. Nightmare is like a bad dream, but there she was. Going up, said Martin, his voice little more than a squeak. So he loses strength of his voice, the strength of his voice, and like the squeak of a mouse. Yeah, going up, she nodded and stepped on. The door slammed. He watched her pudgy hand move towards the button. Pudgy is fat, round, flabby hands move towards the button. She pressed not 14 but 18, the top floor. The elevator trembled and began to go up. The fat lady watched him. The morning she got on at the 14th floor, so why should she go get out get on at the third floor and uh, why did she get on the third floor today and go up to 18? The elevator seemed to be moving more slowly than usual. Martin wanted to press 7 so that he could get out and walk up the stairs, but he couldn't reach the buttons without touching and he didn't want to touch her. When the elevator stopped on his floor, she hardly moved. Out of his way, he had to squeeze past her, rubbing against a horrible scratchy coat. So the coat she was wearing was very rough, had very rough material, so it was like a scratchy coat. He was afraid the door would close before he could get out. She turned and watched him as the door slammed shut. Now she knows I am live on 17, she thought. Have you ever noticed a strange lady in the elevator? He asked his father that evening. Can't say I have, he replied, not looking away from the television. His father was watching television. Martin knew he was probably making a mistake, but he had to tell somebody about the woman. She was in the elevator with me twice today. She just kept staring at me. She never stopped looking at me for a minute. What are you so worried about? His father said, turning impatiently away from the television. What am I going to do with you, Martin? Honestly, now you're afraid of some poor old lady. And so Martin's father's idea is that Martin is not a strong boy. Now he's a weak boy and now he's afraid of some old lady. I'm not afraid. You are afraid, said his father. When you're going to grow up and be act like a man? Are you going to be afraid or timid all your life? So Martin's father wants him to become strong. Martin didn't want to cry in front of his father, so he waited until he got to his room. His father probably knew he was crying anyway. He slept very little. In the morning, when the elevator door opened, the lady was waiting for him. Martin stood there, unable to move, then backed away. So he moves back. As she saw him, her expression changed. She smiled at the door as the door slammed. Martin started running down the stairs. The stairs were dark and he fell. His father was silent on the way to hospital, disappointed and angry with him for being a coward and a fool. So he runs down the stairs, trips and falls and breaks something. And on his way to his hospital, his father accompanies him. And his father is sad that Martin is a coward. Martin had broken his leg and needed to walk on crutches, so he had needed supports to walk. He could use the stair. He could not use the stairs now. Was that why the fat lady, smiled? Did she know what would happen? So Martin thinks that the fat lady is something like a witch, and she can predict he when what would happen to him. So uh, he wonders, did she know what would happen? At least his father was with him in the elevator on the way back from the hospital. There was no room for the lady to get in, and if she did, his father would see her, and maybe he would understand. So perhaps his father would understand why Martin felt like that if he had seen the old lady. When he got home, he could stay in the apartment for a few days. The doctor said that he had to rest as much as possible. Martin felt quite safe from the fat lady now. Oh, I almost forgot, his father reached out and pressed number 9. What are you doing? Asked Martin, trying to sound afraid. I promised to visit Mrs. Almond, said his father, looking at his watch as he stepped out of the elevator. Let me go with you. I want to visit her too, Martin pleaded, struggling to move on his crutches, but the door was already closing. Afraid to be in the elevator alone, said his father. Grow up, Martin. The door slammed shut. Martin hobbled to the buttons and pressed 9, but it didn't do any good. The elevator stopped at 10 where the fat lady was waiting for him. She moved in quickly and he was too slow to get past her in time to get out. The door closed and the elevator began to move. "Hello, Martin," she said, and laughed and pressed the stop button. So the fat lady is really a terror for Martin. This is what happens to Martin on the elevator. That's the end of the story. Thank you.